Welcome back to OnPoint with Ben and Am. This week we are joined by Scott Guymer, Principal Engineer, all the way from the Netherlands at Phillips Healthcare. How you doing, Scott? You okay?
I'm good, thanks. It's nice to be with you.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on board. How are you doing, Ams?
I'm very well, thank you. I've had a busy old beginning of the week, but I am here and I'm good.
You've been travelling all over the country as well, haven't you?
I have. I've been left, right, and centre this week, and I think I've still got a lot to do. But I'm here. So nice to see you again, Scott. I know you're in the Netherlands, but you are originally from the UK.
Yeah, from Manchester originally.
Are you from Manchester originally? I thought it was Wakefield.
No, I'm a Lancashire, well, Manchester boy.
Oh, right, okay.
I can already tell this is going to be one of those podcasts where Ben basically goes onto mute, and it's a reminiscing one to initial, because you guys have worked together before, right?
That's right. Yeah, we worked at Sky, didn't we, Scott?
Yeah, 2016 onwards, something like that.
Oh, it feels like a long time ago, but that's not that long ago, was it? And
6 years, right? That's a long time in my book.
Yeah, it is a lot. And also with Mark Kitching, who we've just had on the podcast as well. So Mark Kitching was our head of tech over at Sky when we worked there. But Scott, why don't you give us a little introduction about sort of what you do now, and then we'll jump into the past.
Yeah, so I'm currently principal engineer at Phillips Healthcare in the Netherlands. I live in Eindhoven now. Bit of a change from Yorkshire, where I used to live.
Yeah, it's big.
And I work in a part of Philips called the Software Centre of Excellence, and what we do is we're a global organisation within Philips to help other developers and teams just get better at what they're doing. So we're kind of a service that people use for consultancy, hands-on help, all this kind of stuff, just to kind of improve software quality and software practices across the whole of Philips. It's about 8,000 software engineers, something like that.
Wow, that's a lot. And you're all in that software centre of excellence, kind of.
No. So there's maybe 15 of us, 20 of us in the software centre of excellence, but there's about 8,000 engineers engineers, testers from us.
Yeah, the whole engineering community. Yeah, wow.
Across Philips, across the world. So they start at Bangalore, Eindhoven, Brazil, the US, Israel, everywhere.
Because just before the pandemic, I think just before, or a little bit like when we opened up a little bit, you were traveling, weren't you? You were going to Brazil, you were going to the different places to meet the teams and stuff. How was
I've had a few trips cancelled over the last couple of years now.
I can imagine. And sorry, go on.
So we got a huge campus in Bangalore in India. It's like 5,000 people or 8,000 people. It's massive.
Okay. So I'm going to jump back into the past now, and then see how it's like relevant in the future for you now and the future for me now. And I wanted to focus a little bit on CI/CD pipelines. And the reason being is recently, at least for me, with lots of people that I work with and engagements that we have at Amardeep, a lot of people talk about, I need to, but this is the phrase I've heard so much in the last month. They say, Ams, I need to know, I need to not know when we've rolled back. That's the phrase I've heard, like, just continuously. And I think it's a good phrase, you know, if you're speaking to like a CTO or someone quite high up, and not even just in the technology area, anyway, they shouldn't actually know when you've rolled back. So I wanted to just talk about when me and Scott worked together. Scott came in and he did all the engineering principles and vision and direction, and led a tribe that we had at Sky with practices, engineering practices. And one of the things he used to talk a lot about was CI/CD pipelines, and I didn't know what a CI/CD pipeline was. I thought it was a mascara. It definitely wasn't. But I've learned a lot since then. So Scott, why don't you talk to us about that journey?
Yeah, so when I started at Sky, we were a kind of brand new team and inherited a whole bunch of projects from other teams, and that was kind of the model that was happening at Sky at the time. I think we inherited like 3 different teams stuff.
It's a lot of stuff.
There was like 40 or 50 projects that all were different, in different languages and different states of quality. And what we needed to be able to manage that as a small team was kind of a good process, right, where we could treat everything as though it was relatively similar, and have the same practices and processes across all of these 40 things. Because with the best will in the world, we couldn't have, you know, our team of like 20, 30 engineers know exactly how to do every single thing in every single one of these 40 projects. It was just not possible. So what we started to do was have a single way of doing things, and then everything started to transition to that single way of doing things. So it was an investment up front of time and effort to convert these things over to use, to have a continuous integration pipeline, which not all of them had, which
no, they didn't.
A good start. And then also moving on to deployment and having them all deploy using the same tooling, even though they were kind of deploying to completely different places, and having that process. And I think we called it Route 66. I think that was what I called it.
We called it Route 66.
Because it's a big highway, and if you're going to go from one side of the country to the other, you go on the big highway, and everything will be fine, right? But if you want to go off into the desert or into the mountains, you can do, but you're going to get lost.
That's how you're going to get stuck.
So the definition of this Route 66 was, here's the tools that we say you should use, and if you use these tools in this way, and then it should be plain sailing from code to environment and customer.
And I think it's important to note as well that our team was a mix of sort of grads, apprentices, right up to very senior people. So it wasn't like, and even in terms of like our product and BAs and Scrum Masters as well, that was a mix of levels of ability as well, and different areas of their career. Obviously, I was brand new, so I didn't know what anything meant. But what was really interesting is Scott would hammer these things into us and we wouldn't understand why. But actually, once we did take the time and effort, and Scott was given the bandwidth actually to lead us down that path, we weren't blocked too tough at all when we started these these good engineering practices. And then by the time we got to a point where we were able to deploy seamlessly, it just made everyone's life so much easier. And I think what it did as well is it brought us all to a certain level of, I don't want to use the wrong word, but I want to say like platform engineering. Is that the right word to say in that? Yeah,
I mean, just engineering maturity generally, right? It was kind of let's try and get everybody to the same level of understanding, and even if they don't know minutely how this particular CI pipeline works, they know that it works in this general way and goes in this general direction.
Yeah, I feel like between Scott and a few others, we were teaching concepts and best practices. So like exactly what Scott said, if somebody couldn't do it, they'd sit and pair with somebody and they'd learn, and they might not get it fully. But it wasn't just with pipelines that did make everybody's life so much easier, and it was a bit tricky. Not all our products had these seamless pipelines, but a lot of them did. It was even when automation testing and different levels of QA that we had within the projects as well, because like what Scott said, we inherited this estate and there was varying levels of quality in there for varying reasons. No one's fault, but just varying reasons. So we put all these practices in place. And what I find now, Scott, and I don't know what it's like at Phillips, but we're going to come back to Phillips in just a second, is quite often when I'm speaking to different people about some of the issues, it goes down to some core best practices in terms of engineering and some fundamentals of BAing, fundamentals of delivery and product. But on that side, very fundamentals. And on the engineering side, it's clearly best practices. That's what's slowing the whole thing down, and that's why you're not delivering. And I do remember once sat with Scott crying because I didn't know what a technical user story was, and I cried and I cried and I cried, and Scott sat me down and he said, let's go through user stories. That's how new I was into technology. And I think with all those things that we did in that tribe, all those fundamentals, the holistic view, the basics, I think that's why we thrived the way we did.
Yeah, and it's entirely a spectrum, right? When you're a one-man team and you're the only person making the code and you're doing it, you don't need all these tools, right? You don't need all this stuff. If you're the person that knows the code base top to bottom, side to side, and you're the only person working on it, then you don't need this stuff. It's stuff you need to incrementally introduce as your team grows and gets bigger and the project gets more complex, and it's too big for one person to hold in their head. Then you need to start introducing them, and it's really important that you invest time back into your stack of stuff, right? Whatever the tools or practices or processes, and don't just always run headlong into building new stuff. You have to realize that At some point you're going to have to invest in CI tooling, into testing, into deployment stuff, into splitting your application up because it's just too big now, right? And re-architecting. And it's the spectrum, and you have to realize that you have to kind of loop back and reinvest in these things as you go along.
Have you, what are some of the core things that when you first walked into the Phillips Healthcare, you were like, oh, I've got to sort of go back to some of the fundamentals or some of the holistic view of engineering, and what have been like some of the technical challenges you've...
The interesting thing about healthcare software is it's very risk averse, right? It's and it's probably going back. A lot of the practices, especially on the older products, go back 10 years. So you're missing out on a lot of stuff that's happened in the last 10 years. And even 10 years ago, it wasn't necessarily all that modern then. Because they're quite risk averse, and generally, the practices aren't necessarily modern. A lot of the stuff that we were doing at Sky is absolutely applicable to the things that we need to improve, or that I'm helping to improve at Phillips. Kind of the same stuff. There was, teams that maybe not doing CI very, very effectively, very little testing, automated testing or unit testing, a lot of manual testing. And we built kind of a framework within Phillips to help assess teams and show them the deltas of where they need to improve in these different concepts.
That's interesting.
So we assess teams on these different practices across the spectrum and say, look, you're it's kind of an energy efficiency label, right? If you're an A and you're doing really well, and if you're a D or an E, you're not doing so well. And we have this assessment that we do across the business.
Like a health check.
Yeah, exactly like a health check. But what the whole intent is to make teams come up with an improvement plan. Come up with their own improvement plan, right? So we don't go around saying you must do X, Y, Z in this practice. It's not prescriptive like that, but it's more like, hey, static analysis is a good idea, and it will make you get better. You should probably do some of it, and the more you do of it, and the better you get, the higher score you get.
Okay, perfect. And how do you? Is there any sort of areas right now in health, particularly in healthcare, like obviously with what's happened over the last few years, where you guys are really focusing? Like I've spoken to a few different tech healthcare firms, and they're really focused on their data, and especially what they get back from their customers or from their users, in order to make sure that product is the best products that they can possibly put out there. And it seems like the whole world at the moment is like data.
Yeah, I think data is an important one, and for a big kind of company like Philips, speed is another one. As you get bigger, you get slower, and things get more difficult. And we're focusing on the next step of the framework that we've been building is looking at how do we adopt more of a DevOps culture within teams, so that we actually have more agility and more ability to go from code to customer really fast. Because a lot of teams are working on 6 monthly or 12 monthly release cycles, right?
Really? Wow. But is that because it's heavily regulated?
No, I mean, maybe. That's the excuse, right? Is that we're heavily regulated, and but the processes that are put in place are based off building software 15 years ago.
Yeah, of course.
Whereas now we've got more modern tools, more modern ways of doing things, and it's what we're looking at is how do we introduce those things into what we're doing, and it's how do we do continuous delivery but still meet the regulatory requirements that we have to provide evidence that we've tested things really well, right? Because I remember people saying at Sky, no one's going to die if it fails. Not quite the same thing in Phillips Healthcare.
Well, this is I think this is it, and I think actually there's loads of industries that are heavily regulated, and they're having to get up to speed. Like banks, for example, the amount of like noisy banks we have now, they're really heavily regulated. The data is really, really sensitive. They can't have a breach of the data, etc. Excuse me. Okay. So that's really interesting, and I'm just going to pick up on a point you said. You talked about a DevOps culture. I've heard recently another phrase, actually, and I'm just wanting to see if you've heard it, but an InfoSec culture.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that as well? Yeah. So I've been speaking to loads of people recently that are going like, we need to have like a DevOps DevOps culture. That's how we need to sort of have be in our engineering teams, but also infosec. And I think I've heard that more in those heavily regulated industries, because
you hear like DevSecOps is usually what you hear.
DevSecOps is the word I was looking for. DevSecOps, that's exactly what the word I was looking for. So it's like, we want to release quick. We don't want to make sure our processes are blocking releases, but also you need to make sure you've done X, Y, Z on different areas. So I think it's really, really interesting. Do you operate in Philips in what are they called? Sorry, teams that are like a can't think of the word, the full stack team. You've got everything you need within cross-functional. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Philips is a huge company, right? So we have everything on the spectrum. We make lots of different types of software, from firmware for microcontrollers inside of MRI machines,
wow,
all the way to like web-based APIs and stuff like that in AWS. So we have this whole spectrum of stuff, and a firmware team is going to fundamentally operate different to a cloud scale team that's building APIs. So we have the whole spectrum. And one of the things that we're trying to focus on with this DevOps kind of cultural transformation is building more empowered cross-functional teams that are able to respond to customers faster and with more accuracy on what the customer actually wants, right? Because fundamentally, when you take a customer requirement at month 1 and then you deliver something at month 6, it's probably not going to be what they wanted.
Yeah, agree.
The reality is, unless if you don't speak to them in the meantime and show them things, it's probably not going to be what they want.
And I suppose you've got a couple of sets of customers as well, because you've got your B2C, I assume, and you've got B2B. Is that right?
Yeah. So we have hospitals that we sell to, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought.
Healthcare providers, we call them healthcare providers, which are
right, because you mentioned the sort of MRI and the sort of the more heavy duty healthcare stuff that you do.
There's a full healthcare solution within hospitals. So we sell make all kinds of different hardware and software products across hospitals, but we also have personal health as well, which is things like Philips toothbrushes and razors and all this kind of stuff.
That's what I'm thinking. When I'm thinking Philips, I'm like, oh yeah, we talk about light bulbs and stuff like that. It's bad. It's fantastic to hear that all the kind of work you're involved in, because we've worked with a few health tech companies, and just speaking to engineers in the market, if you're making a difference and you're working for a company that it's far more rewarding. And from green tech to health tech, that's what people want to be involved in right now.
It would seem so, definitely.
Yeah, and there's this revolution in healthcare tech at the moment. Certainly within Philips, we're going through of how do we make our products, transition our products from traditional release software that, like on a CD that you sell, to software as a service. And that's the big play that we're working on at the moment. How do we move towards software as a service? And I think the whole healthcare industry is going that way.
I think it needs to as well. And I think the pandemic has forced a lot of industries that have been doing well and thriving to have to become a lot more modernized, not just in the products that they ultimately put into the customer's hand, but everything about who they are, which it just needs to, because we rely so heavily on medical stuff. I also did think, when I used to think, it's only until Scott sort of moved to Phillips Healthcare, whenever I used to think about Philips, I always used to think lighting.
Yeah, that's what I say. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, the Philips company does not own the lighting company anymore.
Yeah.
So Philips is well known for light bulbs for 130 years. It actually doesn't own the Philips light bulb. We don't produce any light bulbs. We don't make televisions. We don't make hi-fis, and none of that. It's Philips. The Philips company now is focused on healthcare. The brand still obviously carries televisions and light bulbs, and that brand will live on as the wider brand. But the Royal Philips company is focused on healthcare.
I quite like that. I quite like that the focus for them is healthcare, after so many years of being in a different space ultimately.
Well, you can imagine the concern that happened when Philips sold lighting, because it was literally the first product that Philips ever made, and there's a lot of concern that moving away from its roots of making light bulbs, and this was what Philips was known for. I mean, even the Philips logo is designed to show two light bulbs in it, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I always think lighting, and I think about how it's, I've got all my smart bulbs at home, and they're all Philips, and I run by that kind of infrastructure at home. But perfect. Okay, we'll move away from the brand for a minute. I just wanted to ask one sort of last piece that I wanted to talk about. It was building like best engineering practices and witnessing you do it in a tribe, and then seeing it in different areas that I've worked in. It's really hard. It's not a joke, and it's not just getting people trained up, it's also changing mindsets, because some people don't care to work like that, which is fine. Well, in some circumstances. How has it been over the pandemic doing it remotely?
Well, it's interesting because moving to Philips is a global company, right? So I'm not in the room with everyone that I work with. It's just I can't be in Brazil and India and Israel and all these different places that we have. So yeah, changing it's definitely slower. And you have to look for different methodologies and different ways of doing it. You can't stand up in front of a room of people and tell them all things anymore. You can do it remotely, and it doesn't necessarily quite have the same impact. But relying a lot more on writing things down, right? Explaining decisions, allowing people to consume that is important as well. So we try to use a lot more written stuff. So not just presentations, but white papers, documents, Confluence pages, GitHub pages, whatever tools we happen to be using. And it is definitely a hearts and minds thing. You always have this adoption curve. You've seen the adoption curve, right? And I always say that I'm never focused on the big fat part in the middle. You always have to focus on the leading edge and convince that first 5 or 10% that something's the right thing to do, and get those early adopters, and they will bring the rest of the people. They will do the work for you or bring the other 70% with them, right?
Yeah.
And convincing, finding those people who are early adopters, who are keen, who are always going to help evangelize to everyone else. Those are the people to bring on board and really convince them. And
they're your advocates out there, and not just that with an adoption curve. You might have multiple adoption curves going on at the same time. So those early adopters, for me at least, they need to be about there before the next initiative starts, because I need them back here, and I need them back here. And I think I call it just advocates of what you're trying to do. And the thing is, you have the advocates, and then you have the other side of it as well, which is not an advocate. I don't know what the word is, but
it's hard. It's hard in such a big business. So from my experience, there's a good saying that I heard for this, which is churning the Titanic. So it's when you've got such a big organisation, and when you're looking for the key advocates to kind of come on board with you, but it's a challenge in a big business, because a lot of people have been there a long time. They're quite happy, and they don't want to rock the boat, or the Titanic, so to speak. So and that's the challenge. You need to find some almost like rebellious people who are like, no, this is what we have to do, and this is why we're going to do it. Because otherwise, people just bang their head against a brick wall and they leave these companies. So kudos, because when you're doing it internationally with different continents and languages, Scott, it's a massive challenge, but it's a massive reward, I'd imagine, as well.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot harder, and the pandemic certainly made that more difficult as well, because what people have found is that we found fighting for talent is really hard as well, and retaining that talent becomes difficult. And people want to see return on their investment of time. If I put effort and energy and my life into something, I want to see some return on it. And things move so slowly in a big company like Philips or any big company, that sometimes people can't see the change that I'm having, and they start to get frustrated, and they do leave. And it's always the people that you want to retain that have these options, because they're the people who are invested in making a difference. And
that comes down to culture. And that comes down to culture, Scott. Like, something that really struck out when we had the call with Mark was that the culture of your team, and speaking to you and AMS, and it's like, it's having people with the right kind of mindset and the right kind of vision, and buying into that vision. And then to the point where when Amardeep's like, hey, I do this a lot with Amardeep, by the way. Hey, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't cry like Amardeep did with you, but she'll explain it. And I think that's when you're comfortable in the team that you work with, the culture that's created, and that has that knock-on effect, you know.
The first time I ever heard the phrase "fail fast" was from Scott. And I'd never come across that, even though that concept's probably been here forever and it's just been called different things. And of course, when I was a teacher, I had to fail fast. But when it was said and it was drilled into our tribe from Scott and from Mark, actually from all of us eventually, I never understood that, how open I would become about failing, because you'd learn so much from that failure. And, you know, it's not like you fail and then someone gives you the answer. No. You all get together and figure out the answer, or sit in the failure for a second until the answer, you know, arrives. And I think that culture that we created, I don't think anybody ever, or I hope to God that no one ever says to any of us, you know, I didn't feel comfortable failing in that tribe, or I didn't feel comfortable in that tribe, because because of the nature of the products we inherited. And actually our tribe was called Digital Agency. Speaks for itself. We're an internal permanent team in Sky, and we're called Digital Agency. We didn't have time for people to not feel comfortable and to ask for help and fail. So yeah.
It's definitely so. I'm not an amazing software engineer, right? Like I can't sit and write algorithms and all this kind of stuff. And my job as a senior or principal engineer isn't to be twice as good as everyone else or 10 times as good as everyone else. It's to provide an environment where everyone else gets better, right? Like that's the key thing. If I can make 10 people twice as good, that's way better than me being 10 times as good as any given person, right?
Agreed.
And creating that environment where people can fail, and you guide them away from what I call trapdoor decisions, right? So there's most of the things people can fail quite easily in, right? And they can fail and recover and it's fine. But there's some things you have to watch out, which are trapdoors. And when you fall through it, getting back out is almost impossible. And those are the things you have to protect people from.
Yeah,
but other than that, just you have to make an environment where they can try stuff out, do things, experiment with things, disagree with you as well, right? So I'm not right. Like disagree with me, like, you know, disagree and try something new. Maybe you'll be more successful than I was in the past. And
yeah, there was definitely we used to try and be as collaborative as possible. So we would have quite big workshops and sessions with the team. A lot of times it would, you know, there would be heavy debates or like just a difference of opinions, but that's how you get to the best solution. And this is just, anyway, this is not just strictly engineering, this is product, this is BA, this is delivery, this is all the different disciplines that sat within our tribe. And actually we would borrow from each other. So if this tribe's done something really well and how they've delivered a certain thing, we would take from that and say, hey, let's all apply it to our tribes because it seems to be working. It was a lot of juggling. Definitely.
One of the biggest initiatives that I'm involved in Phillips is having a real impact is our inner source initiative of bringing all our code into one place and making it shared by default with everyone and building a community around that. And that's starting to have a big impact because it gives one place for visibility of everything. And
interesting. One of the clients we work with at the moment, they call it, and I wonder if it's the same thing, and I'm just going to assume it is, they call it internal open source. I'm assuming it's the same thing, right? Yeah,
I think GitHub coined the term inner source, and you know,
right. And then people are having variants. Okay, yeah, because we use one of the clients uses GitHub as well, and we just call it the internal open source. Like everyone should be, engineering community should be able to use each other's code, and they've put in the practices in order to really support that as well, and the infrastructure to support that, so that no one breaks anything badly.
Yeah, and providing these tools to people, like we use GitHub now, providing GitHub and GitHub Actions runners, and providing these tools to people so that, you know, some of the blockers in adopting CI/CD are just, hey, we haven't got the tools, we can't buy this stuff, or we can't get this thing, or, you know, within a big company, buying stuff is really hard.
Yeah.
So by providing these things to teams for free and say, look, you can get CI/CD going. You don't need to pay anyone. You don't need to worry about it. You just need to use it and do it, and it works. That's a big investment that allows people just to start adopting these practices without any friction.
Yeah,
and that's what inner source is bringing to us as well.
I think it's a really good, really good concept. I would have assumed it was already being used, but clearly not, because it's just starting to become a thing now.
Yeah, I think some companies have done it by default. For, you know, newer companies have done it by default for a lot of time. But big companies like Phillips, you know, who grow by acquisition or grow organically in different ways have lots of silos, and breaking down those silos is really important. If we do that by bringing the code into one place and making it visible to everyone, it works. It's working. Let's put it that way.
It's not a bad place to leave it there, Scott. One last question for me. I'm interested. You obviously live in Eindhoven, right?
Yeah.
What's Eindhoven like to live in? I've visited the Netherlands many times, but I've never really gone too far outside of Amsterdam, to be honest with you.
It's very different to Amsterdam. So I was in Amsterdam on Thursday, and it's very different. It's a big city. Well, it's not a big city. It's about 300,000 people, something like that. So, but it's got a big city feel. It's got everything that you need.
Yeah,
there's
cool.
lots and lots of open spaces and parks, and it's quiet relatively, but you've got everything you need. I really enjoy living here.
Best of both worlds, eh?
I don't even own a car. I just cycle everywhere.
Yeah,
but how good's that? Like, in general, cycling is something I took up in lockdown, but like it's always so synonymous when you go around like Amsterdam, the amount of bikes. But I can get, if you've got somewhere with so much open space as well, like Eindhoven has, then fantastic. It's good. You must be a lot healthier than living in the UK.
In the UK, me and Scott used to test each other to eat Costco-sized pizzas. And we would like casually do that, not for anything for fun, just casually.
And then you
so
drive home. When Scott, you want to be getting on a bike after, though.
I used to drive home, and Scott used to drive home. It was really, and that would be casually at lunchtime. So let's not talk about. But yeah. And
you're off skiing as well, Scott, next week, right?
Yeah, looking forward to that. Nice drive down to France.
How long? So how long will that take you from Eindhoven?
I think about 9.5, 10 hours, something like that.
Squeeze that into one day, then, or?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Oh, well,
are you going with the family, with the kids?
No, just with a friend.
Oh, nice, very nice.
Meeting some people in the UK. Some guys from the UK are flying in, and we're driving there. And
very nice. Very
nice.
Nice.
We spoke off air as soon as Scott said, he's going skiing on Saturday. I was like, I'm going skiing on Friday. Where you going?
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're not going to the same place. It would have been a lovely coincidence if we could have had a beer up on top of a mountain somewhere after having the chat. But listen, as a skier, I'm sure you're very excited. I am. This, like I said, it's been 3 years since it's got away now, so hopefully it'll be a nice break. Have a fantastic time, and thank you very, very much for coming on this week's pod. And yeah, we look forward to speaking to you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Scott.